Hey, how was your Christmas? Terrible like it is every year, and it only ends with you feeling like you're absolutely going nowhere because of the eternal sing-song dance you have to play around because of people's political leanings and their inability from shoving it in your face. Oh Christ, lighten up, it's the holidays. Besides, they'll all be dead soon, so who cares? Anyway, I played Chained Echoes. Thank God, I decided to take a break between it all, so I have time to absolutely go through this mammoth. I've played longer games, but this game got like 60 or so hours out of me, not to mention strep throat, so no recording for me for like another week on top of that. Being said, I was actually quite into it over the course of the game, and with a strange mix of comedy and some absolutely pitch black moments, it made for a fun experience that I thoroughly enjoyed, even if it normally wouldn't be my cup of tea. I'm gonna take a chunk of time talking mainly about the story, because I would argue that it was pretty exceptional. It takes place in a time of might and magic. You find yourself in Volandis, a war-torn nation that has been in a constant state of war for the past 150 years. You follow the life of one Glenn, kind of a stock protagonist who was surprisingly close to the story of Guts from Berserk. Shitty childhood, joined mercenaries, kind of be enamored with mercenary band, but while Guts took to wanting to kill Griffith and the whole giant sword thing, Glenn over here decided to say screw it, and he started piloting freaking Gundams. As far as spoiler-heavy parts of the story go, that's about as far as I can get. The game gets dark real quick, and I don't see it anywhere really in the branding, so I don't want to talk about it. It's not like Berserk or Dark Souls, but it's a roller coaster. Sometimes they're cracking jokes about how a princess is completely incapable of societal interaction, the next they're talking about how someone was raped into a coma. I actually quite like it because it all adds like a depth to Glenn and every other character's story, which at first Glenn's story was kind of poor and his character was kind of iffy. Later on he becomes a deeper character, and the fact that he seems quite boring starts to make sense actually when you see what he's been through. I know that doesn't really seem to make sense, but you'll see when you play. It also had a few funny moments. One NPC making a comment that's extremely meta about you reading his dialogue, then he says, "Wait, why'd I say reading? I'm saying this. You're not playing this like a game, are you?" Which I gotta say, Rick and Morty just kind of killed meta jokes for me. But it was immediately followed by another NPC just saying, "Caviar sucks." Something about that juxtaposition just kind of knocked the joke home for me. Or you follow Glenn and the crew of misfits. He finds along his way to stop the stock evil king and also kill God or something along those lines. Typical like JRPG type stuff. The story in the game is simple, follows the guidelines. It's the characterization that I quite enjoy. Every character has some nice depth to them, and they all leave me at least interested. Of course, that doesn't mean every character is created equal, Glenn being the mildly interesting stock hero in the beginning, versus your 5 other party members. Even then, it does that party system type thing where not every character fits into the party and gets to be swapped out and never used during the gameplay. Getting more into the gameplay, I liked it, but it wasn't the standout thing for me. I'm not too crazy about turn-based RPGs as a whole. Pokemon is something I'm generally quite down on, and the other turn-based games like this are usually only a step or two above. The combat is fine, it's nothing to write home about. It has this system about switching my characters frequently, but I admittedly just didn't bother paying too much attention to it unless it was a boss fight, then it worked out pretty well. It feels like it was there to help promote having varied skills between all your characters and kinda having this one Swiss Army knife where every tool had a specific job. But I just kind of made it so that pretty much everyone had DPS skills, and then one person was like a healer and a buffer, and it worked out pretty well, and I chewed through a lot of fights. Except for the Valkyrie lady from the final act, her entire boss fight was just her spamming dodges and then attacking, and she could go sodomize a cactus. Otherwise, it was an interesting feature, but I just didn't need to focus on it too much. The feature I really wasn't into was the Gundam system, or Sky Armors. Sky Armors were like they were Gundam suits. You could fly around the map with them. When I'm running around the map looking for enemies to farm or secrets, I appreciate it because then I don't have to, fight every enemy that pops up. But when it comes to the actual fighting, it just feels like a less involved version of the combat that the game already had. You don't get to switch out skills or characters. You get this weird gear shift thing, which amounts to being gear 2 to kill, 0 to recharge, 1 is the weird go in between, and you buff here too. Otherwise, it was perfectly fine for me, meaning it might be really good for anyone else. That's probably the number one thing for the actual game part of this game that I'd like to mention. I feel like a lot of mechanics are just forgettable, if interesting, I guess. There's a weapon upgrade system, which you get to put a bunch of gems and whatnot onto your swords and armor. I ended up just using the gems that increased damage, because putting them on and taking them off every time a new level of armor or weaponry is introduced would be a complete hassle and not worth my time with most of the other gems, especially since most of them are resist this exact status effect or deal more of this one type of damage. Meanwhile, dealing more damage and increased health gem exists, so no thanks to pretty much everything else. It was, again, set up so you have a Swiss Army knife where every character does one thing, but I'd just rather have all my characters be pretty good at all things, so I don't have to go switch out the gems every other fight, or whenever I get to a boss. I'd rather just be ready for pretty much anything, not just one character ready for one thing and the rest are just kind of mid. Overall, though, I really enjoyed it. I'd recommend it to probably any RPG fan, and would say, even if you're not, give it a try. It's worth the effort. Plus, it's an indie game, and always support your indies.